The night she showed up, the temperature had dropped to 11 degrees, the kind of cold that settles into your bones before you even step outside, the kind that makes the whole mountain go silent. No wind, no animals, nothing, just the sound of snow falling on snow. I heard Bailey first. He was standing at the back door, not barking the way he does when a deer wanders too close. This was different, slower, almost confused, like he wasn't sure what he was looking at. I pulled on my boots, grabbed the flashlight, and opened the door, and there she was, sitting in the snow about 6 feet from the porch, soaked through, ice in her fur. She looked like something between a small lynx and an owl. Wide, flat face, pale amber eyes, thick gray coat matted down with wet, a Pallas's cat, a Manul. Out here, on this mountain, in the middle of the worst storm we'd had in years, she didn't run, she didn't hiss, she just looked at me. My name is Sarah. I'm 42 years old, and I live alone on a piece of mountain property in the northern Rockies, about 14 miles from the nearest town, which isn't much of a town to begin with. I moved out here with my husband Daniel 6 years ago. We wanted quiet, we wanted space. We wanted a life that felt like it was actually ours. Daniel passed away 18 months ago. It was sudden, a cardiac event. The doctors said he probably didn't feel much. I'm not sure that made it easier. After he died, I stayed. I didn't know where else to go. The land felt like him somehow. The pine trees, the frozen creek behind the property, the way the light hits the snow in January, all of it still felt like something we'd chosen together. Bailey had been Daniel's dog first. A big, easy-tempered golden retriever who sleeps in the bed and knocks things off counters with his tail and acts personally offended by thunderstorms. After Daniel was gone, Bailey and I figured out how to be a family of two. Most days that felt like enough. Most days. I stood in the doorway for probably 2 full minutes, just looking at her. The Manul didn't move. She was shivering. You could see it even from where I stood, this small trembling that ran through her body every few seconds. Her eyes tracked me without blinking, wide, flat, ancient-looking somehow. Bailey pressed his nose to the edge of the doorframe. He let out one low sound, not aggressive, just curious, and then sat down, like he'd made a decision. I knew the rules. You don't feed wild animals. You don't encourage them. You don't create a dependency that puts them at greater risk when you're not around. I knew all of that. The thermometer on the porch read 9 degrees now. I went inside and opened a can of tuna. I placed it at the edge of the porch steps, backed up slowly, and watched from the window. She waited a long time, maybe 10 minutes. Then she moved forward, low to the ground, weight distributed carefully, ears turned slightly outward, and she ate, fast but controlled. When the bowl was empty, she sat back and looked toward the tree line. Then she looked back at the cabin. Then she walked off into the dark. I told myself it was a one-time thing. She was lost, disoriented by the storm. She'd find her way back to wherever she came from, and that would be that. I'd have a good story to tell the next time I drove into town for supplies. The next evening, Bailey went to the back door again. Same posture, same quiet attention. I opened it, and she was there, same spot, sitting in the snow like she'd been waiting, though I had no way of knowing how long. I brought out food again. She ate again. And the evening after that, she was back before I even heard Bailey move. By the end of the first week, I stopped pretending it was temporary. What struck me most was what she didn't do. She never tried to come inside, never pushed past the boundary of the porch steps. She ate what I left, and then she'd settle somewhere nearby, under the porch sometimes, or near the woodpile along the east wall of the cabin, and she'd stay, not close enough to touch, not far enough to feel gone. Bailey figured out the rules before I did. He stopped reacting to her entirely. When I'd let him out in the mornings, he'd glance in her direction, she'd hold her ground, and then they'd both go about their business like two people sharing a quiet waiting room. I don't know how to explain that. I'm not sure I need to. Some connections don't require explanation, they just happen, and you either accept them or you spend all your time being confused by them. I accepted it. 3 weeks in, a new storm rolled through, bigger than the first one. The forecast said sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, dropping visibility to near zero, temperatures that night falling below zero. I watched the sky turn the color of iron all afternoon. By evening I hadn't seen her, and I felt something I wasn't expecting, a low, tight worry that sat in my chest and wouldn't move. I kept going to the window, kept checking the porch. Bailey sat beside me and watched my face the way dogs do when they're trying to understand what you're feeling. Around 8 o'clock, I made a decision I still don't entirely know how to justify. I walked out to the garage, unlocked the side door, and propped it open about a foot. Then I went back inside. 20 minutes later, I checked the security camera I have mounted near the garage. She was already inside. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't circled or sniffed the perimeter, or spent time deliberating. She'd walked straight in, found a corner behind my old camping gear, and curled into herself, almost like she'd been waiting for permission. That night I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and listened to the storm push against the cabin walls. Bailey was asleep with his head in my lap. The fire was low but still warm. Outside the world was entirely white and entirely dark at the same time. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the first winter we'd spent out here, when everything felt hard and new and strangely hopeful. I thought about how a place can hold grief and warmth at the same time, how silence can feel like loss or like peace depending on the day. And I thought about the wild cat sleeping in my garage. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know her story. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that about 3 weeks later, I would be standing in my kitchen when my phone would ring, the local wildlife vet, calling with results from the photos I'd sent. Her voice careful, measured. "Sarah, that cat isn't just gaining weight from the food you've been giving her." A pause. "She's pregnant." Pregnant. I stood in the kitchen holding the phone, and for a long moment I didn't say anything. Bailey looked up at me from his spot by the stove. He must have read something in my face, because he stood up slowly and walked over and leaned against my leg. That's what he does when he thinks I need steadying. He wasn't wrong. "How far along?" I asked. The vet, her name was Dr. Allison Reyes, and she'd been working with Rocky Mountain Wildlife for going on 20 years, paused before answering. "Hard to say from photos alone, but based on her size and behavior patterns you've described, my best guess is 4 to 6 weeks, maybe less time than you think." I looked out the kitchen window toward the garage. "What do I do?" Another pause, longer this time. "You keep doing what you're doing," she said. "You keep the space warm, you keep feeding her, and you don't try to intervene." A breath. "These animals are extraordinarily private about birth. If she chose your property, she had reasons. Don't give her a reason to change her mind." I hung up and stood there in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again. I want to be honest about what I felt in those first few days after that phone call. It wasn't excitement, not exactly. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you realize a situation has grown much larger than you ever intended, when what started as a small decision, a quiet act of ordinary kindness, has quietly become something that carries real weight. I had opened a can of tuna. I had propped open a garage door. And somehow, somewhere in the space between those two small gestures, a wild Palace's cat had decided that my property, my small, weathered cabin on a mountain in northern Montana, was the place she would bring her children into the world. I didn't feel ready for that. I'm not sure readiness was part of the arrangement. The changes came gradually, then all at once. First it was the blanket I'd left folded near the camping gear. One morning I went out to check on her, and it was gone, dragged into the far back corner of the garage, wadded into a shape that looked almost deliberate, intentional. She was lying half on top of it, watching me with those pale amber eyes, and I had the distinct feeling I was being tolerated rather than welcomed. I backed out slowly and let her be. 2 days later, an old towel I used for Bailey disappeared from the mudroom. I found it the next morning, incorporated into what I can only describe as a construction project. She'd pulled together the blanket, the towel, a torn piece of foam padding from an old chair cushion, and arranged them into something low and dense and purposeful in the corner behind the camping gear. She was building. I'd never seen anything like it, this quiet, focused industry. No wasted movement, no uncertainty, just an animal who knew exactly what she needed and was going about the business of creating it. I started leaving extra soft materials near the garage door. Old fleece, a worn flannel shirt of Daniel's I'd never been able to throw away. She took the fleece. She left the flannel. I told myself that was fine. I put the flannel back in the drawer where it had been. What happened next surprised me more than almost anything else in this story. She started coming inside. Not all the way, not at first. She'd sit in the doorway between the garage and the mudroom, just past the threshold, and watch me move around the kitchen. Bailey would be lying on his bed, and she'd watch him too, that same flat evaluating gaze, and after a while she'd settle down right there in the doorway, half in and half out, and simply exist alongside us. I never pushed it, never tried to move closer or invite her further in. I just let her observe on her own terms, in her own time. Slowly, over the course of about 2 weeks, the distance shortened. She'd be in the mudroom when I brought food, then near the kitchen entrance. One evening I was sitting at the table going through mail, and I looked up to find her sitting 4 feet away, watching me with an expression I can only describe as thoughtful. I didn't move. She didn't move. We stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes. Then Bailey walked over, sniffed in her direction once, and lay down between us on the floor like he was brokering some kind of peace agreement. She watched him for a moment. Then she looked back at me. And slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, she lowered herself onto her side and closed her eyes. Not trust exactly, not yet, but something in that direction. The night the kittens were born, I almost missed it entirely. A storm had come through in the afternoon, not the violent kind, just the heavy gray persistent kind that settles over the mountain and drains the light out of everything by 3 o'clock. I'd spent the evening by the fire reading, Bailey asleep across my feet, the whole cabin warm and sealed against the dark. I had gone to bed around 10, sometime after midnight, I don't know exactly when. I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. The cabin was quiet. The fire had burned down to coals. Bailey was still asleep at the foot of the bed, which meant it wasn't anything outside that had woken him. And then I heard it, a sound so small I thought I'd imagined it. Then again, tiny, high, insistent. I got up. I pulled on my robe and walked through the kitchen, through the mudroom, and eased open the garage door. The single overhead light was off. I turned on the small lamp I'd set up near the corner and held very still, giving my eyes time to adjust. She was there, curled around something I couldn't see yet. Her head was up, watching me, ears slightly back, not aggressive but clear, a boundary. Don't come closer. I didn't, but in the space between her body and the bunched blankets, I could see movement. Small, blind, trembling movement. 5 of them. 5 manual kittens, each one barely larger than my fist, pressing into their mother's warmth with a determination that seemed impossible for something so new to the world. I stood there in the doorway of my garage on a cold Montana night, and I felt something crack open somewhere in my chest, something that had been closed for a long time. I turned off the lamp. I went back inside. I sat down at the kitchen table and put my face in my hands. I'm not entirely sure how long I stayed like that. The kittens changed everything. Within 3 weeks they were mobile, and within 4 they were a force of nature that I was entirely unprepared for. I had read about Pallas's cats. I knew they were small wild felids, roughly the size of a domestic cat, native to the grasslands and mountains of Central Asia. I knew they were elusive and solitary and rarely seen. What no book had prepared me for was 5 of them, at 6 weeks old, turned loose in my living space. They came inside all at once one morning, following their mother through the mudroom while I was making coffee, spreading out across the kitchen floor like a small invasion, and they never really left. The largest one, a male with slightly darker markings and a confident way of moving, claimed the highest point in every room he entered, the couch back, the refrigerator, the top of the bookshelf. He would sit up there and survey everything below with an expression of complete authority, despite being roughly the size of a sweet potato. The second was a female who had decided that Bailey was her personal guardian and could be found sleeping on top of him at almost any hour. Bailey bore this with extraordinary patience. I began to think he actually enjoyed it. The third was clingy in a way I hadn't expected from a wild animal, always near my feet, always tracking my location, letting out a short chirping sound if I moved rooms without warning. The fourth disappeared constantly. I would do a full count, find only 4, spend 10 minutes searching the cabin, and then discover her inside a kitchen cabinet, or behind the washing machine, or in the pocket of a coat I hadn't worn since November. And the 5th, the smallest, with pale eyes lighter than the others, would watch everything from a distance, never quite joining, never quite leaving, just observing, with a patience that seemed almost philosophical for a 7-week-old animal. The house, which had been very quiet for a very long time, was suddenly completely, overwhelmingly, chaotically full. I won't pretend it was easy. 3 curtain rods came down in a single week. A basket of mail was destroyed so thoroughly that I had to call my insurance company and explain, with full sincerity, that my documents had been dismantled by wild cats. Bailey's food bowl was relocated 6 times in one day by parties unknown. I found a television remote in the bathroom. I found a kitchen sponge on top of the refrigerator. I found the small one, the 5th one, the quiet one, sitting inside my winter boot one morning, asleep, completely unbothered. There were moments I stood in the middle of my living room looking at the wreckage of an ordinary Tuesday and thought, how did this happen? but then the clingy one would climb up onto the couch and tuck herself against my side, and the mother would be watching from across the room, and Bailey would be somewhere underneath 2 sleeping kittens, and the light would be coming through the window at that late afternoon angle that always reminded me of Daniel, and I would feel something I hadn't felt in 18 months. Full, not happy exactly, or not just happy. Something quieter and more complete than that. Full. I should have noticed sooner. Looking back, there were small signs over the course of that week. The mother spending more time near the window, moving differently, lighter, more watchful. The way she'd started sitting near the back door in the evenings, staring out into the dark tree line with an attention that wasn't relaxed. I told myself she was just restless, that it was natural, that everything was fine. One morning I woke up and did my count, 5 kittens. I looked toward the corner of the garage where she always slept, empty. I checked the mudroom, the kitchen, the living room. I went outside in my robe in the cold, and walked the perimeter of the property, calling in the quiet way I'd learned she sometimes responded to. Nothing. I went back inside and sat down on the kitchen floor. The 5 kittens moved around me, uncertain. The clingy one climbed into my lap and made the small chirping sound she made when she was unsettled. 1 hour became 4. 4 became 12. By the second morning, the kittens had stopped exploring and started waiting near the garage door, pressed together, quiet in a way that felt different from sleep. And somewhere on this mountain, their mother was gone. By the 3rd morning, I had stopped sleeping. Not because I was making a decision about it, just because every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear one of them, a small sound from the garage, a shift in the quiet, and I'd be up before I was fully awake, moving through the dark cabin in my socks, checking. Always 5 kittens, never her. Bailey had taken up a position near the back door that he barely left. He'd eat when I put the bowl down, drink water, and then return to that spot and lie with his chin on his paws, watching the door. I didn't know if he was grieving or waiting, or simply keeping watch, maybe all 3. Maybe there's not much difference. The kittens had stopped their chaos. That was what scared me most. These 5 animals that had spent 3 weeks dismantling my home with cheerful thoroughness had gone quiet. They moved slowly, they stayed close together. The smallest one, the pale-eyed one who was always watching, had stopped watching. She just sat in the corner of the garage near the nest her mother had built and didn't move much. I knew what this looked like. I'd seen it once before, in a different context, in a different kind of grief. But the shape of it was the same. They were waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. I wasn't ready to believe that yet. I called Dr. Reyes on the 4th day. I described what had happened, the gradual signs I'd missed, the morning I woke to find her gone, the days of silence since. I tried to keep my voice steady. I mostly managed it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Manual mothers sometimes leave temporarily, she said, especially in the weeks after weaning begins. They'll establish territory, hunt, deal with threats. It doesn't always mean something went wrong. 4 days, I said. Another pause. That's longer than typical. I looked out the window at the snow-covered tree line. What do I do in the meantime? You become their mother, she said simply, until she comes back, or until we know she isn't. I want to tell you that I handled it gracefully. I didn't. The first feeding attempt took 40 minutes. Manual kittens are not domestic cats. They don't simply accept a bowl of food placed in front of them by a well-meaning human. They retreat, they assess. They make you work for every inch of trust you've already earned, and then make you earn it again from the beginning, because the one constant they relied on is gone, and everything is uncertain now. I sat on the cold garage floor for the better part of an hour, perfectly still, speaking quietly, waiting. The large one, the one I'd started calling Summit in my head, for the way he always claimed the highest ground, came forward first. He ate quickly, watching me the whole time, and retreated. Then the one who slept on Bailey, who I'd been privately calling Shadow. Then the clingy one, Pocket I'd named her, for obvious reasons. The explorer came out from behind a storage shelf, ate without looking at me once, and disappeared again. The small pale-eyed one came last. She approached slowly, stopped just short of the bowl, and looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as assessing, as though she was deciding whether I was worth the risk. She ate. Then she sat back and looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked forward and sniffed my hand. I stayed completely still. She pulled back, turned around and returned to her corner. But she'd come, on her own terms, in her own time. That felt like something. The days that followed were the hardest and strangest of that entire winter. I slept in 2-hour stretches. I learned the particular sound each kitten made when they were hungry, versus unsettled, versus simply wanting to be acknowledged. I moved slowly through the cabin all the time, not just in the garage, because one of them was always somewhere near my feet, and the last thing any of us needed was an accident. Bailey became something I don't have a perfect word for. Not a babysitter exactly, more like a co-parent. He let them sleep on him, play with his tail, steal food from the edge of his bowl. He never snapped, never even growled. He just endured it all with the serene patience of someone who has decided that whatever is happening is acceptable. Once, I watched Pocket, the clingy one, climb fully onto Bailey's back, circle twice, lie down, and fall asleep. Bailey turned his head, looked at her for a moment, then looked at me with an expression that seemed to say, "This is my life now." "I know," I told him, "mine too." I was sleeping, actually sleeping, for the first time in days, when Bailey woke me. Not with barking, with a single sound, low and intent, that I'd learned meant something specific. Not a threat, not alarm. "Come look." I was up and moving before I fully understood why. Through the kitchen, through the mudroom, I pushed open the back door and stepped out into cold air that hit my face like a clean hand. The yard was still, morning light, thin and pale, just beginning to find the tops of the pines. Bailey was standing at the edge of the porch, staring toward the tree line. And there, at the boundary where the yard ends and the forest begins, standing in the snow with her eyes fixed on the cabin, was the mother. My first feeling was pure, uncomplicated relief. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then I saw how she was standing. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't holding herself the way she did when she was simply cautious or assessing. She was holding herself the way something holds itself when it hurts. Weight shifted, left rear leg bearing less than it should, head slightly low. She was watching the cabin, but she hadn't moved toward it. I didn't move either. We looked at each other across maybe 40 feet of open yard. Her breath came out in small visible clouds. Mine did too. Bailey stood between us, still, not quite mediating, just present. I could see it clearly now, her left side. Something had happened there. The fur was wrong, matted in a way that wasn't weather, flattened and dark near her flank. She'd been injured, badly. "Okay," I said quietly, not to her exactly, not to anyone, just to the morning, just to the situation. "Okay," I called Dr. Reyes from the porch, speaking low, not taking my eyes off the tree line. To her credit, she didn't ask a lot of questions. "Don't approach her," she said. "Don't chase her. If she came back on her own, she came back for a reason. Get food out, something with strong smell, something warm if you can manage it. Make the path from the tree line to the garage as clear and easy as possible. What about her injury?" A pause. "I'm going to call Marcus." Marcus Chen ran a small wildlife rehabilitation operation about 40 miles north. He'd been doing it for 30 years. "We'll come out this afternoon. In the meantime, just be there. Let her see you. Let her see the kittens." I hung up and went back inside. I warmed broth on the stove. I carried it out to the edge of the porch steps and set it down and stepped back. Then I went to the garage and propped both doors open. Within 10 minutes I heard movement from the garage. She'd come in from a direction I hadn't been watching. I don't know when she crossed the yard. I don't know how she managed it on that leg. But when I came around the corner, she was already inside, lying near the nest, and 5 kittens were pressing into her from every direction at once, climbing over her, tucking under her chin, making sounds I hadn't heard them make since she disappeared. She turned her head and looked at me. Just looked. I crouched down slowly in the doorway. "I know," I said quietly. "I've got you." Dr. Reyes and Marcus arrived in the early afternoon. She had a deep laceration along her left flank. "Something territorial," Marcus said. "Another predator, likely. She'd defended her range and paid for it." The wound was several days old and had started to close on its own, which he said was a good sign, but it needed treatment, antibiotics, cleaning, monitoring. The question was how. Sedation was an option, but Marcus was reluctant. "She's nursing, she's already stressed. If we can treat her without it, that's better for everyone." He looked at her for a long time, then he looked at me. "She trusts you, more than she should, honestly, for a wild animal. That might be our only real advantage here." What followed was one of the most careful hours of my life. I sat beside her. I spoke. I kept my voice even and low and constant, not saying anything particular, just maintaining the thread of sound she'd come to associate with safety over these months. Bailey lay across the garage entrance. The kittens eventually settled, tired from their reunion, into a pile nearby. Marcus worked slowly, She flinched, she went rigid twice, and both times I went still and waited and spoke until she relaxed again. She never tried to leave. And at some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, she turned her head toward my hand where it rested near her shoulder, and she pressed her face against it, just once, just briefly. I looked up at Marcus. He was watching with an expression I recognized, the look of someone witnessing something that doesn't follow the expected rules. He shook his head slowly. "In 30 years, he said quietly, "I've never seen that." That evening the cabin was full again, not chaotic, not the joyful destruction of the weeks before, just full, in the quieter way. 5 kittens spread across the living room in various states of sleep, their mother in the garage moving better already, Bailey in his spot by the fire. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the particular feeling of a crisis that has passed but left marks. Outside the window the mountain was going dark in the way it does in late winter, slowly the light pulling back through the trees in thin strips until only the snow held any glow. It had been a long few days. It had been a long year and a half. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the flannel shirt she hadn't taken. I thought about the way this house had felt when I moved through it alone, how my footsteps had seemed too loud, how the rooms had all felt slightly too large. I looked at the small pale-eyed one, the watcher, the last to trust, asleep on the arm of the couch 3 feet away. She'd chosen the spot herself. I hadn't invited her there. She'd simply decided it was acceptable. I decided not to question it. Then one morning about 2 weeks later, I noticed the mother sitting near the back door again, the same stillness, the same attention directed at the tree line, but this time the kittens were sitting behind her, watching the same direction. And I understood, with a clarity that arrived quietly and landed hard, what was coming next. I didn't say anything that morning. I just stood at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold in my hand, watching the 6 of them lined up near the back door, all facing the same direction, and I let myself understand what I was looking at. She was teaching them. Not in the way I'd been watching her teach them small things over the past weeks, how to move through a space, how to assess a situation, when to hold still and when to retreat. This was different. This was directional. This was her body saying, "Out there, that's where we're going. That's what comes next." The large one, Summit, had his ears fully forward, focused, ready. Pocket was pressed against her mother's side, but even she was looking outward now, toward the tree line, toward whatever the mountain held beyond the edge of the yard. The pale-eyed one, the watcher, the last to trust, was sitting slightly apart from the others, the way she always did, observing everything with that ancient patience, but her eyes were on the forest too. I set down my coffee. I went and sat on the back porch steps in the cold, and I watched with them for a while. Wild animals don't make announcements. They don't give you a date, or a warning, or a moment of formal goodbye. The leaving happens in increments, so gradually that you can almost convince yourself, each individual day, that nothing has changed. The first week they simply started spending more time outside, not far, just the yard, the porch, the edge of the property. The mother moved through the snow in slow, deliberate patterns, and the 5 kittens followed her in loose formation, watching how she moved, where she paused, what made her go still and what didn't. Bailey and I would sit on the porch in the cold and watch them, and it felt less like observation and more like witnessing something that had its own internal logic, its own completion. She was showing them how to be what they were, and they were learning. Summit went first, in the sense that he started ranging farther than the others. He'd disappear into the tree line for an hour, then 2, then half a day. He always came back, at first. He'd return to the garage in the evenings, eat, sleep, and be gone again by morning. Each cycle the return came a little later, the departure a little earlier, the boundary between here and out there growing more permeable. One morning I went out and he wasn't there. I waited 3 days. He didn't come back. I stood in the garage looking at the corner where he used to sleep, that authoritative, ridiculous, confident small animal who had claimed every high surface in my home as his personal territory, and I felt the particular grief of a goodbye that happened without announcement. "Be careful out there," I said to the empty corner. Then I went inside and made breakfast. The Explorer went next. That felt right, somehow. She'd always been headed somewhere. Then Shadow, who had spent so many weeks sleeping on Bailey that he stood at the back door for 2 full days after she left, waiting. I sat with him on the porch the second evening, my hand on his back, both of us looking at the tree line. "I know," I told him. He leaned into my hand. We stayed out there until the cold drove us in. Pocket stayed the longest. Of course she did. She'd always been the one who couldn't stand distance, who chirped if I moved rooms without warning, who appeared at my feet like a small determined shadow, who had decided early that proximity to me was simply her natural state. She still came inside in the evenings, still found my feet under the kitchen table, still made that small sound when she wanted to be acknowledged. I acknowledged her every time. I wasn't too proud to do that, but I could see it changing, the time outside growing longer, the returns growing briefer. Her mother watching her with a patience that felt purposeful, not rushing, not pushing, just waiting for Pocket to find her own readiness. One morning Pocket sat in the open back doorway for a very long time, half in, half out, the way her mother had done months ago, at the threshold between the mudroom and the garage. I sat at the kitchen table and drank my coffee and didn't say anything, didn't call her back, didn't make it harder than it needed to be. After a while she stepped outside. She paused once on the porch steps and looked back at me through the glass. I raised my hand. She turned and walked into the snow. The pale-eyed one left so quietly I almost didn't notice. One evening she was there, sitting in her usual spot on the arm of the couch, watching the room with that expression I'd never been able to fully read, patient, remote, present in a way that felt more like witness than participation. The next morning the spot was empty. I sat down on the couch next to where she used to be and put my hand on the cushion, still slightly warm. I sat there for a while. After they were all gone, the mother stayed for nearly another week. I wasn't sure what to make of that at first. I watched her move through the property in her careful way, checking the perimeter, sitting for long stretches near the edge of the yard. She came inside in the evenings. She let me be near her, which by now felt ordinary, though I understood it wasn't. On what turned out to be the last evening, she came inside and walked through the living room slowly, the way you walk through a place you're memorizing. She went to the garage and stood in the doorway for a while, looking at the nest, mostly dismantled now, distributed piece by piece to 5 different lives on 5 different paths through the mountain. Then she came back through the kitchen. She stopped near where I was sitting. She looked at me. I looked back at her. I thought about the first night, the flashlight, the cold, the bowl of tuna on the porch steps, the moment Bailey had sat down like he'd made a decision and I'd let that decision be made for both of us. I thought about how a life can turn on something so small, a propped door, a warm corner, a person who was lonely enough, or open enough, or simply tired enough of protecting herself from unexpected things, to just say, "All right, come in." "Thank you," I said. I know she didn't understand the words. I said them anyway. She held my gaze for one more moment. Then she turned and walked out through the mudroom, through the back door I'd left open, and into the dark. The cabin had been loud for months. Now it was quiet in a way that had a different texture than before. Not the hollow quiet of after Daniel, which had weight and edges and pressed against you. This was something else, a quiet that felt inhabited somehow, even in its stillness, like a room where something real had happened. I walked through the house the first morning alone, truly alone, just Bailey and me, and I saw all the evidence of them everywhere. The curtain rod I'd given up replacing, the scratch marks along the bottom of the bookshelf where Summit used to launch himself upward, the worn patch on the couch arm where Pale Eyes used to sit, the particular dent in Bailey's dog bed where Shadow had logged what I estimated to be several hundred hours of sleep. I didn't fix any of it. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Summer came, then fall. The mountain did what it always does, changed color, went bare, went quiet. I kept the property the way I always had, fed the birds, kept the woodpile stocked, walked Bailey in the evenings along the creek behind the cabin, where the ice was starting to form at the edges by October. I thought about them often, not with the sharp specific grief of the first weeks after Daniel, that particular pain I'd learned to live inside without it swallowing me, more like a warmth, like knowing something good happened here. Like carrying something in your chest that doesn't weigh anything. Dr. Reyes called in October to check in. She asked how I was doing. I told her honestly. "Better," I said. "I'm doing better." She said she was glad. I think she meant it. I know I did. The first snow came in early November. I woke to it, that specific quality of silence that means the world outside has gone white, and I lay in bed for a few minutes just listening to it. Bailey was at the foot of the bed, still asleep. The cabin was warm. The morning was very still. I got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window. The yard was pristine, unmarked snow in every direction, the tree line dark beyond it, the sky the particular flat gray of early winter. I was thinking about what I needed to do that day. Firewood, a call to the hardware store, something in the pantry I'd been meaning to address. When Bailey lifted his head, he looked toward the back door, that particular attention, that focused, certain stillness. I set down my coffee. I walked to the back door and opened it, cold air on my face, the smell of snow and pine, and the particular clean emptiness of high-altitude winter. I looked toward the tree line. She was there, standing at the edge of the yard, exactly where she'd stood that morning months ago when she came back injured from the territory fight. Same spot, same stillness, same pale amber eyes finding mine across the open ground. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, spread out along the tree line in a loose, unhurried arrangement, were 5 shapes, larger than I remembered, fuller in the chest, broader in the shoulder, the rounded kitten's softness replaced by something leaner and more defined. The mountain had changed them, made them what they were always going to be. But I knew them. Summit, off to the left, sitting elevated on a snow-covered log because of course he was. Shadow, close to her mother's side. The explorer, slightly apart from the others, already half-turned as if considering where next. Pocket, who had found me with her eyes before I'd finished looking at the others, and the pale-eyed one, a little behind, a little separate, watching everything with that patience I'd never been able to fully name. All of them alive, all of them whole, all of them here. They stayed for a few minutes, no more than that. The mother looked at the cabin, at me, standing in the doorway, for a long still moment. Then she looked at her family, then back at me. Bailey pressed against my leg. I put my hand on his head. I didn't call out to them, didn't move toward them, didn't try to make the moment into something larger than what it was. It was already large enough. One by one they turned, the explorer first, then Summit, then Shadow. Pocket looked at me for an extra beat, that same backward glance from the porch steps, the last morning, and then turned too. The pale-eyed one was last. She held my gaze the longest. And then she was gone, moving into the trees, and the others with her, and the mother last of all, pausing once at the tree line, not looking back, just pausing, and then the forest took them, and the yard was empty and white and still. Bailey and I stood in the open doorway for a while. The cold came in around us, and neither of us moved to stop it. I thought about how this had started. One stormy night, one bowl of tuna, one decision made more by instinct than reason, a door propped open in the dark. I thought about how grief works, how it doesn't end, not really, but how it changes shape over time, becomes something you carry differently, how a house that held one kind of quiet can learn to hold another, how loneliness and solitude are not the same thing, and how long it took me to understand the difference. I thought about the flannel shirt still in the drawer. I thought about Daniel, and how he would have loved this. He would have been out on that porch in the first snowstorm with a bowl of tuna before I'd even finished deciding. He would have named all 5 kittens before they were a week old. He would have built them something, some ridiculous over-engineered shelter with insulation and a thermometer, and he would have been completely unashamed about it. I smiled. First time in a while that thinking about him made me smile first before anything else. They came back the following winter, and the winter after that, always when the first real snow arrives, always together, always just a few minutes at the tree line, that quiet presence at the edge of the yard, those eyes finding mine across the open ground, no drama, no ceremony. Just a family, alive and whole, stopping on their way through the mountain to stand for a moment at the place where it all began. And me in the doorway with my coffee and my old dog, watching them, grateful for the storm that brought her, grateful for the instinct that made me open the door, grateful, most of all, for the particular grace of being chosen, not because you were the obvious choice, not because you were prepared or qualified or ready, just because you were there, and you left the light on. I thought I was helping one wild cat survive a storm. I never imagined she'd turn my quiet house into a nursery, or leave me with a family I'd never forget.